caught in suffering, silent casualties. Oh God, grant us peace. In these sleepless nights, I can hardly breathe. Despite brutality, I know that we'll be free. I know that we'll be free. So let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. Let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. In these desperate times, love will hold us here. Love will hold our hands, teach us to have no fear. So we lay our hate down to wash their feet. And when we see our brothers, oh, we'll all be free. Yes, we'll all be free. Let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All the love there's us to see, we'll all be free. Yeah. Let the light in, keep it shining. Let it break into the darkness. All that love there's us to see, we'll all be free. Oh, we'll all be free. Yes, we'll all be free.
Amen. All right. Well, Jonathan, thanks for doing this with us. We appreciate it. We're traveling the country, talking about voting, talking about many of the issues that are surrounding voting. I appreciate your invitation to talk about specifically the role of immigration and the role of the many people in this country, and how we have a system that responds well, and a system that's, in my view, a system that's very broken about how we treat overall, and especially how we treat people who have come to this country. And I don't even know the best language for it. I'm not comfortable with immigration language, really, so I don't know how you all talk about it. But it feels like calling someone an immigrant is, in and of itself, that's this label that divides and makes someone feel like they're different from other people who are living here. And so anyway,
well,
I'm open to this conversation.
Sisterhood
Yeah.
is a pretty good way to talk about it. My friend Bob Zellman was a member of SNCC back in the day. Bob always says, brotherhood and sisterhood are not nearly as impossible as those who profit from preventing it pretend. And I sure appreciate what Vote Common Good is doing to talk to folks who, by virtue of our faith in Jesus, do have sisters and brothers all over this world. And whatever you make of the boundaries between countries, that can't trump or supersede our allegiance to one another in the family of God. So yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about what it means to love our neighbors who are undocumented, our neighbors who have come from other places to this country in this election, because for the last 4 years, people in that situation have been very demonized, and no one knows that better than Jose. I'll let Jose tell his story, but y'all are here at School for Conversion and at the St. John's Baptist Church in Durham because Jose can't go anywhere else. He's been in sanctuary here for 3.5 years, and after living in this country and raising his family in this country and pastoring in this country for more than 3 decades, he found himself in this situation of having to come here in order to prevent being separated from his family. So I just wanted to introduce Jose, and then maybe we can talk about what situations like his demands of us in terms of how we vote. But Jose, would you be willing to tell people who've never heard your story just a little bit of where you were born, what you loved about that place, why you had to leave, and what it's been like here?
Yes, my name is Jose Chicas. I born in El Salvador. I born in El Salvador 1965, and I come to the United States 1985 when I have 20 years. I live over here in this country for 36 years almost, and I have married to my wife in 1992, and well, when I come to USA 1985, the immigration catch me in a board. I go to jail, and my sister paid the lawyer, taking me to the jail. I coming out. Uh, I have one order, deportation order. I talked to my lawyer in 1985 what happened if I go to court, and the lawyer said, you don't need to go to court. This no big deal. And this was my problem when in 1991 I filled out I applied for asylum. I
Helpful. It might be helpful for people to know that that was 1986, right? In 1988, when Ronald Reagan was leaving the office of the presidency, he gave a speech about people in your situation.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, there are a lot of people who've come to this country who don't have proper documentation. And Ronald Reagan, who many of my Republican friends still celebrate, Ronald Reagan said, someone in your situation should get asylum because the immigration system was very messed up then.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was how you came, but that was 30-some years ago, so go ahead.
Yes, and I come and I have the asylum give me my permit for working. I have my social security. I have my driver license. Everything. I live good in this country. But night now this change the president in 2016, and this president give me the order deportation. When I go to immigration in 2017, the ICE tell me, you don't have no more opportunity to live in this country. You need to go to your country because this president said use criminal people. And he taken me my paper, my license, my social, everything. And he give me the day for June 27, 2017, I need to leave this country. This why I come into a school for conversion. I stay over here for 3 years and a half almost. Wait for something to change in this 2020. Maybe ask to everybody coming to vote for this nation needed change, because this president stand and elect, he do something bad. He said all the Spanish people, all the immigration people is criminal people. No, not right, because I have 18 years already. I received Jesus in my heart. In 2015, I as pastor, my wife and my family still together. But this why I stand this school for conversion, because I don't want to separate to my family. Because I live over here for 36 years. I live in my country 20 years. Because I come into my country because the civil war in my country is too bad in 1985. This why I looking coming to United States. This why I ask to everybody come to vote, because the nation need to change. The governor, they need to change this country because this is a beautiful country. But now, this president state right now, he doing something bad, This why I ask to everybody coming to vote, change this president, maybe by the Democrats change something else, There's a lot of family in this country. Too many people have a deportation too many kids no have a father, no have a mother in this country because this government separate family.
Yeah.
This I stay over here for 3 years and a half, and this house. So I wait. I hope. I think God do something this November 3.
And when I told Pastor Jose that Vote Common Good was coming today and that he would have a chance to share his story, both you and Sandra said you wanted to invite your friend Gus. So I'm glad Gus came. And Gus, maybe you could share about how y'all became friends and what this friendship has meant for you.
Sure. We, at the time we met, Jose and Sandra, we were at Durham Church, which is Durham Presbyterian Church. Iglesia Emmanuel is their sister church. And we heard they were selling pupusas over here, and my wife looked up on Facebook, Stacy, and she said, I need to go give her a hug. She read about the whole backstory and everything. And so we just showed up one Saturday and got the car washed and bought pupusas and just had a just initial meeting. And then it kept coming back each month. We're going to do it again. So we came back, and then the time it really stuck, there was the first press conference we'd ever been to here out on the front porch. And I don't think we had any idea what we were getting into, to be honest with you. The Lord works in mysterious ways and puts you right where you need to be, right where you need to be there. So, you know, I was just able to just kind of start seeing little things, and I'm like, you know what? I need to get out of my introverted little hole, and I need to start learning a little bit more. And the nudge I got was, see what you can do for Jose. So I said, well, a little closer, all right. So I said, when could we have lunch? And he thought about it, and he said, Fridays. And I said, okay. So it just started out with me bringing lunch, and we just talking over lunch, and then coming over and helping out with pupusas and stuff. I'm not much of a help when it comes to washing cars. They're much better at it than I am, but I help, and I take money and count money and fill orders and all kinds of fun stuff. And it's, you know, it's not just here. It's also the church that he and his wife pastor. We've gone and visited that church. We love their church. They're wonderful. And you also get yourself into predicaments that you learn different cultures, different ways, different things. And the learning experience is beyond anything. It takes you out of this little bubble, this happy little bubble that you're living in, and you start learning about the rest of the world, and you start seeing the rest of the world, and then you start meeting Jose a little bit better and learning a little bit more about him and learning about his family, learning about his kids, and meeting all of them and being able to talk to or text or anybody. I mean, they're our friends. We love them. The whole family, the whole church. Nothing's going to change that. They don't have different problems than us. They're exactly the same. They speak Spanish, so hey, let's learn it. Let's start breaking down the divides. There's no reason to build walls when bridges are cheaper. You just have to be willing to come out of the little protective bubble you feel like you're in and really love your neighbor.
Yeah.
Because we were only given 2 commands: love God with everything we've got and everything we are, and love our neighbor as ourselves.
Yeah.
That's it. You need nothing else if you can follow those. I fail miserably a lot, but you got to love your neighbor. And when you love your neighbor and you take care of your neighbor, it is amazing how your needs are met more than you could have tried or done or any better than you could have done yourself. It just happens. It's promised to us.
You know, your story reminds me, a lot of people have come here, and because Jose has been willing, and in some ways forced to be so public about his story. He has, Jose also has a very pastoral heart. And so, these sitting and having lunch with people, listening to people's stories, I think that's been much of your vocation over the past years. But it reminds me of the first year you were here when the local independent newspaper did a kind of a long story, told this whole background, and they put Jose's face on the cover. It's a weekly, so it was all around town. And do you remember that next Sunday morning they had mentioned early in this story that one of the things that you missed was having the McDonald's pancakes. And so the next Sunday morning, somebody knocked on the door who he didn't know, and he opens the door and he says, "Yes," and he's holding this bag of McDonald's pancakes. And if I remember right, he introduced himself like this. He said, "My daughter gave me the newspaper with your story because she knows I voted for Donald Trump." And he said, "I voted for Donald Trump because I believed in some of the things he was saying, but I didn't think it would mean that this would happen to you." And I think that's a really important perspective that Jose has offered to a lot of people, a sort of a concrete, personal witness to what the cruelty of policy violence and just language that criminalizes people and demonizes people can do to a person and a family that has very much been part of the network of this community, as you were saying, for longer than I've been around here. I mean, I've only been in this community about 20 years. So thank you for sharing your experience. We got some other pastors here too.
Yeah. Well, Gus, can I ask you a question about that? Thank you for sharing that story, by the way, and for creating this friendship. Do you think, or did you ever think a lot about the politics behind the relationship separation that happens between people like you and Jose, and do you think a lot about the politics of it all?
I do. I'm sure people don't want to hear my politics anymore. Growing up in a very conservative Republican family, there was, your worldview was pretty well set as a child, and you kind of go through and then you become an adult, and things start tugging at you in different ways. Politically, I think we're way past a two-party system. Way past. I think it's antiquated. I think it's old. I think the Electoral College should be abolished. There's lots of things that need to go on. However, because we have to make a choice, my choice is going to be for the good of everybody, not the good of just who's within these borders. Because I don't know if everybody knows the music of or not, if you listen to his Radio Z or whatever, but he says, yes, I love the kingdom more than I love this country. I love my neighbor more than I love his papers. Mm. So it's kingdom above everything. Mm-hmm. The cross comes above the flag. Mm. And yes, my political views have completely changed.
Oh, what? Have they changed since 2016, or did they change?
They changed a little. They were changed a little bit prior to that. Uh-huh. I could see there was danger coming.
Yeah.
And in that period of time, the woman who is now my wife, I just remember one thing she said. She had just come out of a stroke, and she saw the footage on television. And all she could say was, that man is evil. Mm.
One of the people who's traveled with us, his name is Samir Samalovic, and Samir is an immigrant. And one of the pieces he does at many of our events is to talk about how this political moment that we're in, where it's all this confusion, makes all of us feel like whatever world we're living in now, we don't understand, and we all feel like we're immigrants. We're all having to learn a new way. We're all having to learn a new way forward. And that for those of us who see ourselves not as immigrants, to have a friend who can lead us and become that immigrant sort of ambassador, the one who helps us learn how to speak a new language and see new places and become more flexible and learn new patterns and new habits. I mean, I don't want to get into all of it, but I would imagine you sort of feel like you've immigrated into a new way of thinking and being in your own life. And I just wonder if Jose and his wife and their family has sort of helped you to immigrate into a new way of being.
They very well have. You can run into some people and tell them, hey, I'm really trying hard to learn Spanish and be able to communicate better. And you can say that in the workplace, and you get about 75% of everybody who just wants to laugh at you. Why are you doing that? But then you'll have somebody like Jose's family, Jose's church. And they're very patient. They're very kind. When I'm here, Sandra doesn't want anybody to talk to me in English because she knows I want to learn how to speak the Spanish. I can understand a lot more than I can talk. And I still don't understand all that well, but I can understand a lot more than I can speak in Spanish. But they're all very patient. They're all very loving. If you've got an issue inside the family, we know about it. We're close. We pray for each other. I know we do, because if you ask Jose to pray, he's going to. He's got a book. He's going to write it down, and you are going to. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And so when they ask us, you can't just offer lip service. You're going to pray. That's all it is. But, I mean, just, their kids have been a big help, too. Because as we're sitting in church, either Oscar or Ezekiel, somebody will lean over and whisper, this is what they were just talking about. And
He's your translator.
somewhat, yes, very much so. And it's nice. And it just really all depends. And it's been fun getting to know everybody and to see the different traditions. Because, if you go to a church vigil at a white evangelical church, you've got an hour of time allotted, and you're going to go through that hour of time. If you go to vigil at Jose and Sandra's church, the best way Ezekiel said was, it's over when it's over. And that's one of the differences. And then they also break bread together a lot. They're very close in community. And that closeness, we have a little bit of it, I'm sure, but we don't have the closeness that a lot of other cultures have.
Hey, Vanessa, would you be willing to talk about a bit of your own story, whether it's...
Sure. So, my husband and I pastored real traditional churches for 10 years, and in that process, it became really important to us to become foster parents and adoptive parents. And so when we were living in Michigan, we adopted our little girl from the foster care system, and she is a Latina. And so, I can't tell the details of her story because it's her story, but that opened me up. It was my passport. It was my chance to travel into another culture that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn about. And so then we moved from Michigan to Arkansas, which is a really interesting political place. The town where we live is very diverse. And so, in some ways it's easy for Charlie. In some ways it's very hard. When we first moved into our neighborhood, I was out walking the dog, and a lady walked up to me and said, "Oh, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. We go to such and such church. We'd love to have you join us. And we're just really glad to see some white people moving in." And I'm not very fast on my feet, but at the time there were 5 of us. And I said, "Well, we're 20% Hispanic." And thanks for the invite to your church. So yeah, it's a complex place where we live, because they feel that free to speak in that way, and yet they're fine with they're fine with these families and the work that the community, the Hispanic people and Marshallese. We also have a huge Marshallese population where we live. They're fine with them working in our chicken plants and keeping our corporations going. So it's been a huge process for me to learn about the complexity and why do we have these divides, and why are we okay with mistreating a group of people that are so kind and work so hard and are such good neighbors. why is there an us and them? And so it came to a head for me. I'll go ahead and tell this story quickly. About a year ago, August 3rd, was the shooting in El Paso, and that one really threw me for a loop because of the shooter's motivation. We found out like the details for this particular shooter. He drove 10 hours to go direct to El Paso, and what he was targeting was not just brown people, but he was targeting a way of life in El Paso where they had really, there was no us and them. There is no us and them in El Paso. There's no border for them. It's this is their community. It's, you know, you happen to live one side or the other of the border, but that doesn't matter. Everybody's, you know, they're married to each other. Their families are connected. And what that shooter was trying to do was trying to disrupt something that was so good and so true and so healthy, and was disrupting something really sacred. And so I had to understand it. So I went to El Paso to see it myself because I needed to understand what was going on. And so I had a chance to go and see the border wall and a detention center. And of course, you can't get anywhere close, but you can kind of see how harshly guarded it is and how complex it is. And then to learn from the activists there about the complexities that exist. That was when I started to become an activist, essentially. Once I saw it with my own eyes and stopped thinking like, well, you know, what can I possibly lend to the conversation? Now I have eyewitness account. I have skin in this game, and it matters to me. And I have a responsibility to speak up and to explain to everybody who's saying, well, I'm not racist, but I just want them to come here the right way. Well, what is that exactly? And it's such a cheap way of expressing something that you don't have any idea how complex it is, how much it costs and how long it takes, and how unfair those policies are and conflicting. That's a little bit of my story.
You know, it strikes me that the signature coming on the scene of Donald Trump's presidential campaign was, I'm going to build a wall, Mexico's going to pay for it, and we're going to deport the violent peoples. That is, and while in the last 4 years, for some reason, that has become sort of hidden underneath the soil of all the rest, it still really sits at the heart of it. And it's hard to care about these issues and not make this not only political in the broad sense, because neither political party has wanted to deal with immigration. Both parties, in my view, have spent the early part of the 2000s using it as a wedge issue, and they didn't want to give ground to either side. And there was a thing going on when a lot of us thought there was going to be comprehensive immigration reform that didn't happen. And I am not convinced that a Joe Biden presidency will necessarily solve that. I know that it's going to solve that Donald Trump has made everything worse, and Joe Biden won't be the solution to all problems, but other than the very specific problem that is Donald Trump. But then people of faith, people of activism, people of communities have to rise up and hold these politicians accountable to not use immigration as a pawn in other political battles, which is what I think is going on. I could be wrong that that's what's going on, but it feels to me like that's what has happened. And if we don't, if all the parts of the community, like if we continue to say that issues like immigration is really about, it's a problem for immigrants, and if I'm not an immigrant, then I shouldn't speak on it. It's an everybody problem. It's especially, I think, a white person's problem, the way racism is particularly has a white problem center to it, and has to be, white people have to do their work. And on this issue, it really feels like it's that way. And so I don't know what we want to talk about, but Tim, I'm interested in your ideas because you've done such good work on this. I feel the pressure as a middle-aged white Midwesterner from Minnesota that, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about these issues or not, right? It comes up a lot where you don't want to center your own experience, but then so many people in my communities just take a pass. They just step back and let all the rest of this go on and say, well, it's kind of complicated, I don't know, I don't understand, someone has to solve it. And I don't know that our faith communities have done enough to help us, know the stories of Gus and know the stories of Jose, and but we're not. I don't know. It feels like we could solve getting rid of Donald Trump and his particular violence around this issue, and then have the issue. So I don't know what I'm saying with all that. I wonder what your thoughts are about this.
Yeah, so thank you, Doug. And thank you, Jose. Thank you guys for such deeply personal stories. So my particular lens, I guess, here today or in this group, I am a community organizer. I'm the co-chair of an organization here in town called Durham CAN, which stands for Congregations, Associations, and Neighborhoods. And we have been around for 21 years and have had some remarkable successes. I'm also an adjunct professor at University of North Carolina, and one of the things that in my own journey, both as an organizer and then sort of the nerdy academic side of things, is when I started doing what we call critical whiteness, which is really looking, the simplest thing is looking at the power of whiteness. Look at how whiteness recruits people of all races, perspectives to a way of being. And that way of being is the kind of the hidden secret norm. Probably done that, right? When we've violated some whiteness by bringing your 20% brown to that particular neighborhood. We've all violated. And one of the marks of whiteness that's one of the most dominant and easy to miss is niceness, right? It's easy for, Jonathan and I sit down together and we're at the country club having dinner, and which we've never done. And I don't think, probably the two of us, based on where we've come from, never been to a country club. But there's a certain, yeah, but there's a privilege that can come in terms of niceness, or a privilege of not naming inequity, or not naming pain or loss, or all of those things, because we don't have the same stake in the game changing. And I think that's one of the most, so Doug and I have been friends for a million years, and I always, whenever I visited him in Minneapolis, one of our kind of little liturgies that we have with each other is always telling my first nice story. Like who was over the top nice at the airport, or the ride over, or a friend. But nice is a really big way of saying, not only do I not want it to change, but I might be threatened by that change. And as a community organizer, this is the biggest challenge. And I'll say this as, I actually didn't believe in change, and I believe very profoundly in change. I have seen changes that were beyond my wildest imagination of what a few people of faith could do. But one of the most common pushbacks on this is the idea that, well, wait a minute, if we're going to make something structurally change in the society that we're in, I'm going to have to actually interrupt somebody. I'm going to have to provoke something. I'm going to have to name something. For example, right now, we're working in affordable housing and are putting up 2,000 to 3,000 units of affordable housing, workforce housing in Durham. But we're also organizing in Durham Housing Authority. And if you live in Durham, we kind of like to falsely think of ourselves as a progressive oasis, a kind of place where you don't need a whole lot of change because we've kind of figured out how it is, which is false thinking. But our affordable housing communities here are beyond belief. Just like you got in grade school or high school, they're rated by HUD on a 0 to 100 scale. We have two large communities here that were rated at 30 or 31. And I do remember, if I ever got a 31 on a paper, I knew that was not just failing, that was below the mark. And the people who are committed to serving the people that live in DHA here are not bad people, but there's a structural game that's being played such that we would allow that to be. Because I kid you not, if that was my family, or if it was someone that I knew, and when I mean like a 30, what a 30 means is flushing the toilet upstairs and shit coming through the ceiling. What it also means is mold growing all over the walls. It means things like sinks falling out, and I've got a great just list of photos in my phone over the last 3 weeks of those items. That's what a 30 means. And passivity or hoping does not change those things. And there's also a question that you guys brought out about neighborliness, right? Because one of the questions of neighbor that really strikes the core is, who do I care enough about that I will totally inconvenience my life or be horrified by their pain? And I think that's one of the things that as an organizer, we are often provoking people to say, it's not that we care abstractly about people living in a house that has green mold or black mold all in it, but would you get up out of your car and go there immediately to help them clean something or fix something or demand that the right thing be done? And so that in itself, that's part of the power of whiteness in our society, is that sense of security, that sense of things will get better, right? We'll keep playing the game, and the rules will be fair. The same, the people who are the best will continue to win, and those are powerful recruiting tools. And Gus, you learned that pretty quickly in terms of your own experience, not because you were a bad person, but you understood that it took a certain type of risk that made you uncomfortable to make this beautiful friendship. So that's just an observation as a community organizer of how powerful our sense is of, this is ours, we belong, we're entitled to something, and it's not a very large leap from saying, I'm entitled to something, so if Jonathan wants to do something, that might be perceived as a threat to me. That's not a big jump from Jonathan's a threat to shouting, build a wall at a rally. That water looks good. Thank you, John.
Jonathan, you've been in this neighborhood a long time, 20 years, you said? Is change like Tim's talking about? Is that possible? Is it impacting the immigration narrative here? Do you feel like when you came in here, and I don't know what 20 years would have been in the late 90s, does it feel like a different story?
One of the things that I was encouraged by hearing in your story is that you were saying that you were compelled into taking action by the fact that the power of the community in El Paso is what had elicited the violence. And I feel like that's something that we often miss, especially in terms of the politics of this. So a city like Durham has a pretty incredible base of Hispanic, black, and white folks who've lived together here, and who really increasingly over the last decade have, in public ways, expressed a need to work together and to work together in a coalition to move the state forward for everyone. And that changed North Carolina. It changed just in 2006, 2007, a coalition statewide, but very much representative of that population here, changed our voting laws, right? We're now in the second week of early voting, and for 2.5 weeks in North Carolina, you can vote, which means that voting is not just something that people who can get off on, that Tuesday in November can do. And there were people who were very opposed to that. And let's just be honest, people in both parties were opposed to that because they knew how to expect the people who voted, to turn out in their particular districts, and they knew how to maintain power that way. Well, this coalition pushed very hard to build power, to increase the turnout, and when we did, it changed the balance of power. So, right, 2008, there's a long story of people being pitted against one another in the South in order, in particular, for the Republican Party to use that to hold on to power across the whole state. That's usually called the Southern Strategy. And tied to that Southern Strategy was an idea of the solid South, that you could lock in power at a statewide level, even if you gave it away in a few districts that would never have representation never have a majority in the state house. You could lock it up statewide by holding on to this solid South, and that had everything to do with getting to that 270 in the Electoral College, because if you got 13 states, that are already locked up from the beginning. It makes it easier to get there. Well, that was fractured in 2008, not only by the sort of grassroots organizing of the Obama campaign that's often talked about, but specifically by the changes that that coalition in North Carolina had made. And I think it's really important for people to see that the kind of white nationalism that is politicized and that's aimed at demonizing, folks like Jose and populations like immigrants or Muslims or, whoever the target is, that was fueled by the power of that coalition, right? Because that political power was changing who was in charge, and that scared people. And so, in many ways, I think Donald Trump is the character who was able to kind of play the tune that reaction needed. But it's to me, it's really important that in communities like this, so many of our Christian sisters and brothers have been led astray, often not knowing it, by people who were part of this effort to hold on to power, and that incredible amounts of money were being spent by, folks who, don't just have one bus. They got dozens of buses going in and out of communities, all October, every election year, handing out free vote your values flyers, in the parking lot at every service, telling people that what it means to be a Christian when you vote is to vote on these very narrow wedge issues with this party that is committed to dividing people. And so at the same time, right, that becomes a very concrete part of the formation program of so many churches in a place like this, particularly white churches. The party and the partners of those campaigns are actively using these very divisive tactics to try to split that coalition that they're afraid of. And I think you see that right on the ground in a neighborhood like this. But we also see it around the country right now. So whereas I am both disgusted and concerned about the kind of violence that Jose has experienced, I'm also encouraged because I know that there is a coalition that can come together. And what I, as a person who cares about the church, what I'm trying to tell churches every chance I get is that we have a real opportunity to be saved from something that is killing us. It's making us worse people than we were before in very real ways. It's making us worse people, and it's making people who aren't already part of communities want to have nothing to do with us. And I know every church I talk to is concerned about that. There's a huge issue just in terms of being the kind of place that people would want to be around. So in that sense, I think this political moment is an invitation for the church to have a little come to Jesus moment in terms of who we are and our identity and the way it's been manipulated by the political world that I'll say, lots of folks didn't choose, but it's here.
And Jonathan, one of the things that I would say, just as an encouragement of that, is that congregations can change so much. And when I'm talking about change, I'm talking about not like hundreds of congregations, but scores of congregations. I could take you to East and West Baltimore and show you the work of, I think, 27 congregations that have literally changed the whole structure of life in a footprint. Places you couldn't have filmed The Wire anymore because it wouldn't look like it did then. But here in Durham, when congregations got angry, for example, in around 2000 and I would say 2012, 2013, a pretty popular practice here related to immigration was faith stops. So our, whether it was our sheriff or our city police would set up immigration stops outside of largely either Catholic churches or churches that had a high Latinx population. This was normal practice, and this was the kind of permission given. And interestingly, our research in the area, we researched it meticulously. Durham is, I think, Jonathan, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's still a 55% non-white city. And we found that in this community, we were searching motorists of colors at 4 times the rate of motorists of color in Greensboro. I don't know if you guys have been to Greensboro or Fayetteville, which were 2 communities in North Carolina. Not quite as large, but the same kind of demographic, right? And we were searching, in fact, we were sitting with the command staff of the police department, and one of their like number 2 or number 3 guys was African American male, looked like he could still be an NFL tight end. And he said, when I get pulled over on the Durham freeway over here, I still get nervous, and I have to remind myself that the person pulling me over works for me. And so to some degree, that was normal practice in Durham. And about 30 congregations and about 5 to 6 or 7 organizations came together and said, we will not tolerate faith stops in this community. We will not tolerate grabbing somebody of color and saying, you are a threat because you don't have an ID. And so we were able to get the faith IDs that could come out of faith communities, and the police were willing to accept those as a person of standing in the community. We were able to, and I say this as because the word for me is believe, we were able to get the first written consent to search. So that if you're stopped if the bus gets stopped on the way out, if they want to search the bus, right, they need to bring you a piece of paper and have you sign that piece of paper that says it's the first in the U.S., that says you know your rights, and your rights are that you don't have to let them on the bus. And when you think about that change, and then just recently, cash bail has disappeared in this area. And it wasn't 1 million people that did that. It wasn't hundreds of thousands of people did that. It was basically about 5,000 to 6,000 organized people. And that's enough voters to turn the election here. We've seen the elections in our local cities change toward affordable housing proponents in the city council. And so that would be my biggest word. When I was with you guys a month ago, I was sitting there thinking, not only is this great, but the one word I would probably throw out there and yell would be believe, that what they're doing matters dramatically. And it doesn't take a lot to take what is normative in terms of treating people as illegal or inhospitable in communities. It didn't take a lot to change that theme in communities. And as Jonathan and I have both been here, 30 years for me and 20 for him, we've seen those things change here because largely the biggest group of people that said this is not tolerable were congregations. And as we all know, if we were to grab a book on church history, Christians have disagreed with each other on a lot of things, right? But this type of basic humanity is something that we ought to be able to agree with each other on. And even the most cynical person, I've seen the research on this, if we cared not for people from other cultures and countries, healthy countries are people that receive people from other places, and healthy economies do that. So if we were just horrible, instrumental exchange people, and we were sitting here thinking, what would make it better for me? We would certainly not be for the politics that have dominated the U.S. in the last 4 years.
Jose, can I ask you, does your church and your community, do they feel connected to politics? Do they feel connected to the kinds of things that we're talking about here, that people can work from the grassroots up, or they can elect the right kinds of leaders? How is your community thinking about politics?
Well, my people in my church, almost all my people don't have a paper for this United States, or it's illegal. But he still pray because he said, he asked to the another people have as American citizen. He talked to, hey, you need to go to board, because now all the people, too many people in the church, the Spanish church, say it's Republican people. All the Spanish people that have American citizens say, I Republic, I support Trump, because the Trump is the guy putting Trump in the White House. But too many people talk to another one, say, no, Trump knows no guy putting Trump in the house. Trump is bad man. need to pray, need to change the mind, because the whole people say, no, I no go vote for Biden, I no go, I Christian, I no go for Biden because Democrats are not good. But my people say, no, you need to go to vote because need to change this nation, you know. All my people are scared, you know, because all the people talk, say, oh, if he Trump reelect, what happens for no 4 more years? Maybe nobody have no paper, nothing. All my people are scared in my church because no, I have only my two sons, about 5 people is American city, and then other people is not having no paper, nothing. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous. The Spanish people now is scared, you know.
When you heard Donald Trump saying the things he was saying when he was running, did you think that you were going to get deportation papers after he won, or did you think that won't happen?
No, I don't think nothing. I think this, well, when the people say Trump, when he win, the change the United States very different, everything. I never think he taken my paper. I never think he do it too much thing as bad. Never. I think he's very good man, you know, man. This was too many people, you know, revoked. And now I know my wife family. She have about 20 people before as Republican. All the family, my wife. But now all this family asked to my wife, no, no, no. This 2020, I change my mind. I forget Republican. I go to Democrat. Yeah, about 20 people to my family, my white family. And I know too many white people come and visit to me and say, I Republic. But I know your situation, I know the all United States, too many people in a sanctuary, too many kids separate the family. I forget Republic, and now I vote for Democrat.
Wow.
Yeah,
You could single-handedly change the election outcome in North Carolina.
yeah.
The Jose party, or super spreader. The party of Jose. But I mean, that really does feel, I think a lot of our stories are related to that, right? That when your own experience makes that change. And as hopeful as that feels to me, honestly, it feels like we don't have time to run around and have everyone have, you know, trips to El Paso and meet Jose and go join their church. Like there has to be a movement afoot that's fueled by that, but has to be broader than that, because not every, that I don't know that can take enough time. I mean, if we have enough time for all that, I don't know.
Well, and I think we think about the people who haven't changed their mind. And I think we can all hope and pray that if each of them had a chance to sit with you for lunch for a few weeks, they might come to that point. But what Tim was talking about in terms of organizing, and that's why I think what Vote Common Good is doing is so important, is that part of understanding how systems work is to say that a lot of people come to, you know, believe things very sincerely because a system has kind of directed them that way. And if you can get enough power to change the system, you can change the things that have shaped people to think that way, right? So I think often about, you know, I grew up with grandparents who had been Southerners who had come through the 60s. Like, they grew up in segregated schools, and they grew up in churches, white churches, where everyone told them that the absolute worst thing that could happen, the thing that would send our whole culture to hell, is if, you know, if the desegregation movement, if the people who were trying to, you know, take down the signs and integrate the schools had their way, you know, it was just going to be, what do they say about Democrats today? You know, it was just going to be hell. It'd ruin everything. And then it happened. And, you know, my grandfather went into an integrated military, and he was a musician. He played in bands, black and white together, became friends with people. You know, the thing that everybody had told them was like unimaginable, it happened, and the world didn't fall apart. Like, people moved on. Of course, new lies came, and people believe some of those lies too. But I'm just saying, I think that's one example of how if a system changes, it gives people an opportunity to live into a different way, and so that's what gives me hope. I mean, I do think personal stories and experiences we have matter, and the organizing that we can do out of those who are of a similar mind, I think can change systems. So.
I'm struck. We've traveled around the country with this effort, and we go to different places that they're centers of American. They're little engines, right? So we were in Warren, Michigan, which is the car capital, and we were in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and it's Silicon Valley, and you go to New York, and it's the financial kind of capital, and we go to Florida, and it's this kind of entertainment place. There are parts of our country where what drives the country comes from that place, right? It's sensed there. And I have often felt that the kinds of changes that happen in faith communities and in integrated organizing happens in North Carolina and happens actually in Durham, and in some ways happens in this little part of Durham that we're in now. Do you guys have that sense living here? Like, do you feel like you're in a Silicon Valley or a Detroit or a New York of like the movements that people hear about and talk about? And do you sense that that's happening here? Because I think it is. I actually believe it is. This is one of those places and these stories get told nationally. Does it feel that way when you're living here?
The gift of living here is that you get to know people who've been in a tradition of that, right? So I'll just tell you one story. Since if you go in the house up here, there's a room dedicated to Ann Atwater, and I can show you the little community action training certificate she got in 1968 when she did 17 weeks of community organizing training. But when she did that, she said, I learned that if I used what God gave me, which was my mouth, I could talk and I could organize people. And one of the communities she organized was this one. Like, she went door to door and organized this community, and built the kind of interracial fusion coalitions that have built power to change this city and this state and I think the country in profound ways. And it's a real gift to know people like that, and to know that, I mean, you can watch a film like Selma or something that dramatizes, our civil rights history or a particular moment, or this year John Lewis died, and there's all these sort of, beautiful speeches that are given, and people remember. And I think sometimes you can hear those stories in a way that these people feel like, superheroes, like the Avengers movies or something like that. They have this power but no, like, these are people who are beautiful and incredible people, but there's too many of them to call them exceptional, right? These are people who've learned a way of being, and who don't think that they're unique. They believe that you can do it too, and it's been a gift to know those people and to be part of movements with people like that.
I know it was my project of the last 5 or 6 years. Jonathan's a leader in a powerful movement that's not local. It's the Poor People's Campaign, but was born here in the as the moral movement, and it's the kind of natural place. Like, I'm sure somebody could explain why there's lots of tornadoes in Oklahoma, right? There's the topography, there's the way the winds come, there's the way the heat and the cold come together, and this has been an area with a pretty unique history of multiple forces coming together, and the fact that North Carolina has been truly purplish for a long time, and given the really regressive politic that hit here at 2010 or 2012, made this a place where it was natural for the kind of movement and to take on things like the Southern strategy and wedge issues. But I spent 4 or 5 years doing research in the kind of the backwash of that, of doing life stories of leaders, and I wrote 10 conversion stories, basically 10 life stories of key leaders who came out of Christian faiths. And it covered, it's gay, it's straight, it's black, it's white, it's evangelical, it's mainline, it's secular, it's all of those things. But I worked for quite some time, and I wrote these extensive, long almost book-sized, each one of them, conversion stories. And one of the things that's really interesting in these conversion stories, and these are people who either out of a staid traditional Christianity or evangelical heritage, is about half of them, who would have thought that social justice activism was the antithesis of their faith, right? I'm sure you felt that way, right? That you were changing teams and probably getting rid of your God to some degree. And what's so amazing about those conversion stories is they're nowhere near as radical as you would imagine them to be. I mean, these are just people who are encountering difference in a significant way. But, and I think this is what's been so good about this project, I mean, it's just been so lovely, is it often, you can't have a big tent community where people bump into each other unless somebody puts a tent up, right? And somebody puts a sign up and somebody drives a bus around. And so that's one of the interesting things, is this idea of what kind of structures can you build so that neighbors find each other. And if you push it, and I won't, you never ask people about their dissertation because you'll be asleep in 30 seconds, but there are structures that you can build that I think matter. And I think that's probably what's unique about this area, is there have been people who've been intentionally putting tents up where people can bump into each other.
Well, I just want to, we're going to wrap up in a minute here, but Gus, you used a phrase at the beginning when you said you went to I can't remember the name of the Presbyterian church.
Just Durham Church.
Durham Presbyterian Church, and it had a sister congregation.
Yes.
And that's one of those structures, right? That there's a sister congregation, that these two community groups have a chance to sit next to each other and to meet, and building those opportunities for sisterhood or brotherhood and those moments of connection just really does seem like it's the thing that we need in order for then people to organize and rise up to the moment, right? That they really do exist. And Jonathan, I don't know if you'd just say a word or two for people on the live stream and those of us here who don't know what the School of Conversion is. So it's in that house over there, and well, that's at least the office place for it. And it's such a interesting phrase, a school of conversion. So maybe even say something about those words and what you're doing with those, and maybe then we can have a last word from anybody else.
Well, we say we try to make surprising friendships possible. So it's sort of fusion politics all the way down, right? So whether it's sister congregations or whether it's partnering with people through COVID, which is one project we did this year, folks who needed to be isolated in an intentional relationship with someone in the community, just to make sure we make it through together. We're always trying to find ways to connect people, and in particular to connect people across the divides that are intentionally written onto us. And the phrase, we often get confused with all sorts of things, calling ourselves a school for conversion. Some people are always concerned, are you trying to, proselytize? Are you trying to get people to confess a particular tradition or faith? And what we often point to is where we got the term was from the desert tradition. They said that in the 3rd and 4th century, when people went out into the Egyptian desert and tried to practice a way of life patterned after the gospel that could help them see a new way to live in the society. One of the people who described it said that the desert became a city. There were so many people who were flocking out of the way of life in a decaying Roman Empire that felt unsustainable into the desert to sort of experiment in a new way of life. They said that what they were doing was a school for conversion. They were creating a curriculum for transforming your mind and your way of life such that you could live differently in society. So we've tried to do that, and to do it in kind of a connection point between these many witnesses I was saying, who have cultivated a fusion politics around here, and faith communities that are trying to figure out how to direct people in the way of Christ-likeness.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for all this. Anyone else have anything you want to share? Dan's going to serenade us here with a song, which I think really sits in this whole tradition. It's part call, it's part testimony. I think it's a sort of school of conversion song. But Anybody else with anything that you wanted to say? And vote.
Vote.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, vote common good, meaning make the common good your voting criteria. Which, you know, Gus, I really appreciate the way you said it. Like, I'm going to vote for everybody. That's even a cleaner way of saying, you know, a fancy word like common good. So, and it's you know, we like to say vote early, vote often, just not in the same election. So if you know, if you've already voted in this one, get ready to vote in the next one. And if you haven't voted in this one yet, get in there early. You don't know what's you don't know what's coming. Dan, anything you want to say with a song of conversion?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this and share with us. Thank you for your stories. Gus, I really resonated with you because I grew up in a very conservative Republican world, and I don't think I even knew a Democrat until like late high school. It was like finding a unicorn, you know. It was like, but I remember when the house of cards started to fall for me, and it was because I was reading more scripture. I went to Bible college and read the words of Jesus, studied those words, and then things just started to not line up with the tradition I grew up in. And long story short, I put it into a song, and tells a little bit of my story, and it's a little bit of a lament and a rebuke and a call for those who have lost their way to come back home. So. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service, melting tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, so I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, so I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. They started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. With your fear it turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. You weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. You said to love the lost, so I'm loving you. Said to speak the truth, so I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, Come home. You're better than this. You taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. You're better than this. You taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. Oh. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. Calling, oh children, come home. And you said to love the lost. I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth. That's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome, and justice roll down. May love overcome, and justice roll down. And justice roll down. May love overcome and justice roll down. Thank you.
May that be. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.